The courtroom erupted into a cacophony of reactions, from the measured satisfaction of the prosecution to the stifled sobs of Grace, whose composure finally crumbled under the gravity of their reality. Oliver's gaze met hers across the room, a silent exchange that conveyed the magnitude of the fight ahead. The conclusion of the trial marked the beginning of a harrowing sojourn for the Kane family. Oliver's conviction reverberated through the small community of Crestwood with the resonance of a bell tolling, signifying the change of an era. The once vibrant Kane home now lay shrouded in silence, a mausoleum to the joy that had been so swiftly snuffed out. The days that followed saw Grace navigating the legal labyrinth crafted by the prosecution's sensational case against Oliver. Amidst the legal white noise, Grace's resolve never wavered. Deep within, she harbored a vehement certainty of Oliver's innocence. Acting on her instincts, she intensified her collaboration with Tom Harrison, the private detective she had engaged. Harrison was a methodical man whose quiet confidence offered a glimmer of potential exoneration in a seemingly hopeless cause. Behind prison walls, Oliver encountered a daily gauntlet defined by solitude and suspicion. But within this mire of despair, seeds of doubt had begun to take root. The surreptitious words of a fellow inmate, a passing comment by an unconvinced guard, every minute aspect that fed the suspicion that a wrongful conviction had taken place. Harrison hit the ground with determination, maneuvering through the dense bramble of legal paperwork and police reports. His keen eye uncovered the first signs of inconsistencies, missing evidence here, a misfiled report there. Tidbits that whispered of negligence or, worse, deliberate malfeasance. As Grace placed her trust in Harrison's findings, there was an unspoken understanding between them that the road to redemption would be fraught with obstacles. Each new revelation unearthed by Harrison would need to be potently substantive to overturn the tide of public opinion and the seeming solidity of the case against Oliver. Within her support group of friends and family, Grace felt the undercurrents of doubt ebb and flow. Some held fast to their belief in Oliver's misdeeds, shaken and unwilling to accept anything that contradicted the image of a family man they thought they understood. Others whispered in hushed tones that perhaps, just perhaps, an innocent man was paying the price for another's sins. In the deepening twilight of one such evening, Harrison sat across from Grace at the kitchen table of the Kane household. His face was etched with lines of fatigue, the result of tireless investigative work that now took precedence over all else. "I think we've got something," Grace, Harrison said, his voice a low thrum of cautious optimism. "There's evidence that doesn't align with the prosecution's narrative, an unusual pattern of activity in the financial records of one of the investigating officers." The words hung like a specter over the room, the implications branching out in various directions, each harboring its promise of truth. Grace's eyes, which had lost so much of their former luster, now sparked with an intensity born of a burning desire for justice. Despite the veneer of normalcy that had been draped over Crestwood since the trial's conclusion, undercurrents of discontent swirled within the community. Oliver's conviction, while bringing closure to some, ignited questions in others, fueled in secret by the gentle probing of a detective unswayed by the court's gavel. Following the trial, the town of Crestwood became fractured by conflicting loyalties and the enduring question of Oliver Kane's guilt. The once united community found itself dissected by invisible lines that demarcated the believers from the skeptics, as lingering doubts began to fester like weeds in the shadow of the verdict. Grace Kane, now the focal point of both condolence and condemnation, walked the streets with her head held high, her faith in her husband unshaken. The whispers of townsfolk, once friendly neighbors, stung as they reached her ears, suggesting that perhaps the man they had revered was indeed capable of heinous acts. Detective Harrison's breakthrough, which pointed to possible corruption in the investigative process, was a fulcrum upon which the weight of public opinion began to teeter. Grace and Harrison, emboldened by the uncovered discrepancies in the case, sought to reignite the flames of inquiry and advocacy for Oliver. They began to stitch together a coalition of allies, each member contributing to the growing chorus demanding a closer look at the evidence that had seemed so ironclad. In the fervor of their efforts, Grace encountered varying reactions. A local journalist, intrigued by the prospect of a deeper story, offered to publicize the emerging discrepancies in her column. However, a member of the Crestwood City Council, ever concerned with the town's reputation, advised caution and restraint, warning of the risks of unsettling the resolution that the trial had seemingly brought. Within Lockhaven Penitentiary, Oliver's plight garnered unexpected compassion from an unlikely contingent, even among those who had once viewed him with unequivocal hostility. Marcus, his neighbor, began to relay the loose bits of news that seeped into the prison, rumors of mistakes made, of a possible setup, of Oliver's innocence being a genuine consideration among some circles. Oliver listened, each verified detail a buoy in a sea of doubt, the burgeoning belief in his innocence from the prison community a surprising salve to his battered spirit. Every piece of news from outside reinforced his sense of identity beyond his prisoner number and the cold steel of his cell door. It gave him hope that his truth, too, could see the light. But for every advocate Grace and Harrison found, there were plenty who wished the Kane name would simply fade from memory. Coffee shops and Crestwood diners became arenas for debate where locals parsed over every statement and rumor with a veracity born of a desire to understand, or perhaps to deflect from their own grievances. Amidst this societal schism, Oliver's greatest struggle lay not within the solid walls of the penitentiary, but within the ethereal walls of communal belief. The divide within Crestwood not only shaped the external narrative of his life, but also deepened the internal conflict festering within his own heart. Oliver questioned the societal facade that had been so well maintained by the Kane name, now tarnished beyond recognition by the brushstrokes of suspicion and fear. In the silence of the night, following a day marked by the impassioned debates of Crestwood citizens, the Kane household stood as a beacon of resilience, lights burning late into the unwelcoming darkness. Inside, Grace Kane sat hunched over a sea of paperwork that had once represented her family's undoing. Now, it served as the battleground upon which she and Tom Harrison waged their war for Oliver's exoneration. The house, which had once rung with the laughter of her children and the steadfast reassurance of her husband's voice, echoed with a stark emptiness. In the quiet hours, Grace replayed the days of the trial, dissecting every argument and piece of evidence, seeking the crack in the veneer which the prosecution had so masterfully polished. Meanwhile, the mood at Lockhaven Penitentiary grew increasingly somber as Oliver's desperation clawed at the veneer of calm he had fought so hard to maintain. Marcus, who kept watch over Oliver's space with a vigilant eye, noticed the subtle changes, a furrow in the brow, a shift in posture, a sigh too heavy for the stifling air of their shared confines. Yet for Oliver, victory seemed an unattainable outcome, its possibility torn from his grasp by the jury's declaration and the resounding ring of the judge's gavel. Still, the seed of hope that Harrison and Grace had planted refused to wither in the darkness of his cell. Instead, it took root, fed by each morsel of potential evidence and every whispered rumor of corruption that pointed to his innocence. Within the community, lines were drawn with starker contrast as the prosecutor's victory morphed into a Pyrrhic triumph. Evidence of police mishandling leaked onto the tongues of the townsfolk, igniting conversations that had once been taboo to consider, a chilling prospect that the tapestry they had woven around Oliver might have been ingrained with threads of deceit. Back within the walls of the Kane residence, Grace couldn't escape the void that Oliver's absence had left in her life, a void once filled with his laughter, his wisdom, his embrace. Yet even in her solitude, there remained a fierce promise, a vow to hold the broken pieces of their family together, to right the unjust wrongs, and to restore a semblance of the life that had been so viciously ripped away. For the prosecution, the echoes of victory were muted by the stubborn murmurs of doubt that seeped through the corners of their assuredness. While they had secured a conviction, the whispers of potential exoneration for Oliver Kane grew louder, sending ripple effects through their ranks and leaving them to ponder the reliability of their success. In the wake of the prosecutor's victory, the once pristine image of the law's infallibility within Crestwood began to tarnish, leaving residents to question the foundations upon which their sense of justice had been built. Grace and Harrison, through their relentless pursuit of the truth, had turned the tides of public opinion, transforming the Kane case from a closed chapter to an open wound that demanded attention. The steel door of Oliver Kane's cell clanged shut with a hollow finality that echoed through the cinder block walls of Lockhaven Penitentiary. The victory of the prosecution had left him with an indeterminate future, one that would unfold within the confines of a 6-by-8-foot world. The early weeks of his sentence were the hardest. The cacophony of the cell block, the shouts, the clang of metal, the unceasing drone of despair was a constant assault on his wounded spirit. But over time, Oliver's presence began to stir curiosity rather than contempt. His calm demeanor in the face of relentless adversity shifted the attitude of the inmates around him, their initial hostility waning as they observed the man behind the headline. Sharing the daily routines, the long walks in the yard, the meals in the crowded mess hall, many of the prisoners found their initial assessments of Oliver at odds with the man before them. It was inconceivable to them that this soft-spoken, introspective individual, who offered a kind word or wise counsel, could be guilty of such a monstrous act. Marcus, ever the silent observer, began to initiate conversation with Oliver, small talk at first, which deepened into discussions about life and mistakes, penance, and redemption. As their friendship grew, Oliver found a sounding board in Marcus, someone who provided not only companionship but insights into human nature garnered from years behind bars. Meanwhile, Grace worked tirelessly on the outside, meeting with Tom Harrison at all hours to pore over evidence and piece together a potential appeal. Each visitation was both a salve to Oliver's existence and a reminder of the life that continued beyond his reach. Grace relayed updates on their progress, her voice a lifeline in the otherwise oppressive silence of the visiting room, lessened only by the shuffling of guards and the murmur of other inmates and visitors. One such visit brought with it a surge of tentative hope, a breakthrough in Harrison's investigation. "We've found discrepancies, Oliver, in the security footage timelines, in the way the evidence was logged," Grace relayed with a fervor that warmed the cold, sterile space between them. Oliver's eyes, which had dulled with the passage of time in confinement, lit up with a cautious spark. Could this be enough? He dared to ask, his voice a mixture of hope and the crushing familiarity of disappointment. "We're building a case, Ollie. We're going to bring you home," Grace affirmed, her hand pressed against the plexiglass divider, a pale imitation of the connection they yearned for. Back in the solitude of his cell, each piece of news from Grace and Harrison revitalized Oliver's determination. He began to engage more with his fellow inmates, teaching some to read, advising others on legal queries, a makeshift counselor imbuing his lockup with purpose. As the weeks turned to months, the truth of Oliver's personal integrity spread through the prison like an underground current, shifting perceptions among not only the inmates but the guards as well. Their treatment of him, once cold and detached, warmed significantly, humanizing the sterile environment he had come to know. Through the simultaneous pursuits of Grace and Harrison on the outside and Oliver's own silent campaign on the inside, the narrative of the villainous Oliver Kane began to crumble, revealing the man who had once been Crestwood's esteemed citizen. A man whose life behind bars contrasted starkly with the image painted by his accusers. The relentless clang of metal bars and the suffocating walls of his cell could not dampen the vividness of Oliver's memories. Each night, as the prison lights dimmed to a ghostly glow and his cellmates succumbed to fitful sleep, Oliver's mind turned toward the past, a bittersweet refuge from his present predicament. He would close his eyes, willing himself to be transported back to Crestwood's sun-dappled mornings, the sound of Lucy's giggles floating in through the window as she chased butterflies in the garden. He remembered Ethan's fierce concentration as he laced his cleats before a soccer match, the boy's innocent pride in his muddy uniform post-game. These distant memories of idyllic days became not just his solace, but a lifeline to an identity that was increasingly threatened by his incarceration. In the stillness of the night, these thoughts pieced together the remnants of a shattered life, giving him courage and resolve until the harsh light of dawn stole them away once more. Meanwhile, Grace found her own solace in their family album, fingers tracing the outlines of a history now tinged with absence and injustice. She whispered words of love and encouragement to the photographs, a silent conversation with the husband she fought for tirelessly and the son she mourned endlessly. As the days unfurled with the monotonous predictability of prison life, Oliver clung to these memories as proof of the man he truly was, a devoted father, a loving husband, a community pillar wrongfully caged. With each retelling, he reinforced the narrative of his innocence to himself, a mantra against the looming despair. During visitations, Grace and Oliver exchanged stories of the past, each detail a brushstroke and a painting they desperately wished to step back into. Grace shared updates on Lucy's life, her school achievements, her evolving interests, each one a heartening but painful reminder of the life that continued outside his reach. Lucy, though often silent during these visits, would occasionally light up with recollections of outings with her father, her words painting pictures so vivid that for a moment, the dreary visiting room would almost transform into the vibrant scenes she described. Detective Harrison, diligent in his investigation, also became a keeper of Oliver's memories. With every visit to the Kane home, he witnessed the stark reality of a family torn asunder, fueling his commitment to uncovering the truth and restoring what had been so unjustly taken from them. It was one such evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the Kane's living room, that Harrison laid out his latest findings. A breakthrough, financial trails, and liberally bent protocols that pointed to a far more sinister orchestration at the heart of Oliver's plight. "Grace, this is going to change everything." Harrison's voice carried the weight of potential redemption. "We're closer than ever to proving Oliver's innocence." With each revelation, the prospect of reuniting the Kanes, of mending their shattered narrative, grew more tangible. And it was within the echoes of distant memories that they found their strength to continue, to fight against the impending sense of permanence that Oliver's conviction threatened to bestow. In the confines of his 6 by 8 foot prison cell, the concept of time twisted into an unrecognizable tangle for Oliver. Days smeared into nights, and the changing seasons registered only faintly through the scratched and weather-beaten window in his cell. Yet, as indefinite as his sentence might have been in terms of time, the tectonic plates of his circumstances were gradually shifting. One particularly frigid winter day, the normal prison routine was broken by an unexpected call for Oliver to the warden's office. As he approached the imposing entrance, a feeling of trepidation tightened his chest. Had there been a setback in Grace and Harrison's investigations? The stern face of Warden Abernathy, one that oversaw the daily humdrum of Lockhaven with an iron fist, softened into a rare smile as Oliver was ushered in. "Kane," he began, "your case has attracted attention from higher-ups. Seems some folks aren't as convinced about your guilt as our efficient legal system." As Oliver returned to his cell that day, he bore with him a glimmer of newly kindled hope. The knowledge that influential voices were now questioning the legitimacy of his conviction resounded louder than the clanging prison bars. In his heart, he knew it was Grace's unyielding efforts that had moved this mountain. In the heart of Crestwood, the weeks leading up to Christmas filled the air with a bittersweet nostalgia. Within the Kane household, the Christmas tree that Lucy and Grace decorated bore colorful symbols of hope amongst ornaments radiating memories of happier times. Through quiet tears, Grace hung Oliver's favorite ornament, a small, hand-painted soccer ball that Ethan had made years ago. Meanwhile, Tom Harrison, now a regular visitor at the Kane house, had news to share that he hoped would cast a silver lining over their holiday season. The anomalies he and his team had discovered, shaky timelines, gaps in procedural compliance, hints of police corruption, now bore potential fruit. "An external review of your case has been opened, Grace," he shared, his voice heavy with the promise it held. In Crestwood's local newsroom, Penelope Martinez, the journalist who had strongly pursued Oliver's story, was handed a task that stood at odds with her beliefs, covering the town's Christmas festivities. Despite the bitter pill, she saw an opportunity to keep Oliver's cause alive within the community. Her articles subtly tied in updates on Oliver's case alongside the festive tidings, cleverly embedded to stir conversations and keep the flame alive. As Christmas arrived with a blanket of snow, Crestwood shone with a veneer of normality. Yet, beneath the twinkling lights and carol-filled nights, the ground was shifting. The voices that questioned Oliver's guilt grew louder each day, echoing within the town's homes, seeping into the community consciousness, and chipping away at the certainties of the past. With the onset of a new year, Lockhaven Penitentiary seemed a world away from the festive celebrations that had laced through the final weeks of the year prior. The reinforced steel doors, the monotonous dress code, and the rigid routine allowed little room for optimism or joyous reflections of hope.